Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and several people believe that ours is not the first advanced civilization on the planet. As a matter of fact, some scientists have suggested that the first intelligent species wasn't even human. There isn't much speculation about the start of civilization. It's generally accepted that it all began in Mesopotamia about 6,000 years ago, and there's plenty of evidence to support this. But could there have been a civilization before Mesopotamia? A civilization so advanced that it rivaled and perhaps even surpassed our own? And could some huge cataclysmic event have wiped it from the face of the earth, practically destroying any and all records of its existence? In this video, we're going to examine the possibility that ours is not the first technologically advanced civilization to rule the planet. To do this, we're first going to look at just how easy it is for civilizations to lose their records and go backwards. This has happened in recorded history, and more than once. Then we'll look at a couple different ancient writings. One that describes a superior race that was blessed with wealth and technology, and another one that seems to describe technologies so advanced as to harness the power of nuclear weapons. And then finally, we'll take a look at evidence from tens of millions of years ago that suggests that Earth just might have had a global industrial civilization way back then. Then stay with us for our Fact or Fiction segment. There, we'll take just a few minutes and look at this report more objectively, looking at what was fact and what was fiction. And then Amy is going to come on, and she's going to talk about how some of these theories just might not be as crazy as they sound. So, this report begins in between two rivers. In Greek, the word Mesopotamia means between rivers. This ancient civilization was located where modern Iraq is today. At some point prior to this civilization, a group of wanderers found themselves here, between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. And it was at this point in history that these humans harnessed the power of agriculture, and that changed everything. Prior to this, people were just pretty much at the mercy of the environment. They were just wanderers, going to wherever the food was. But once agriculture was established, other important advancements sprung up, virtually overnight. Law, mathematics, astronomy, and most importantly, literacy. Once writing was developed, well, people could record events and thereby immortalize them for all future generations. And because the human written record seems to have begun in Sumer in Mesopotamia, mainstream science says that prior to this point in history, humanity was at best made up of small groups of people wandering from place to place. But the fall of Rome shows us that people can forget, and humanity can actually go backwards. See, about 2,200 years ago, Rome conquered Greece. And then for the next 600 years, the Roman civilization grew technologically, and the world stood in awe and marveled at its advancements. As you know, they were the first to create cement, aqueducts, large-scale sanitation systems, solid quality roads, social care, welfare for the poor, and they even developed elements of surgery. But then, in 476, the Germanic leader Odoacer sacked the city of Rome, and the Roman Empire fell. And then something happened that no one thought was possible. Within just a few short years after the fall of Rome, for most of Europe, society went backwards. Gone were the days of advanced architecture, literature, medicine, and social care. Within just 2 generations, nearly the entire population of Europe became illiterate. And during this time, many people began to forget that Rome had ever existed. Generations of entire families were born, lived, and died, believing that the great splendor of Rome was nothing more than a fairy tale. People thought of Rome in much the same way that most of the world now thinks of the lost city of Atlantis. Well, eventually a new society grew out of the death of Rome, and then the Roman records resurfaced, and Rome went from a fairy tale to a solid staple in human history. Could the same thing be true of an ancient pre-Mesopotamian civilization? Could society presently be in a 10,000-year-long dark age? And could the wondrous lost city of Atlantis actually have been more than just a fairy tale of an island that was lost to the sea? In 1938, the self-proclaimed prophet Edgar Cayce leaned back, closed his eyes, and drifted off to sleep. And then he began to speak. Edgar Cayce claimed that he could see the distant past and the far future, and because he supposedly did his readings while he was asleep, he's now known as the Sleeping Prophet. And although some people say that many of his prophecies never came true, on this particular day, it appears that maybe one of his predictions might have had some validity. As with all of his meetings, his wife Gertrude conducted, and a lady named Gladys Davis took notes. The home was filled with several believers who waited in quiet expectation to hear what the prophet was going to say. One of his predictions that day was about the lost city of Atlantis.
A portion of the temples may yet be discovered under the slime and ages and seawater near Bimini. Expect it in 68 or 69.
On September 2nd, 1968, while diving off of the coast of North Bimini, 3 divers discovered an extensive stone pavement just 20 feet below the surface. The structure was so unique that the divers were convinced it was man-made and part of a much larger complex. It ran northeast to southwest and is now commonly known as the Bimini Wall or Bimini Road. Since its discovery, the Bimini Road has been visited and examined by all manner of geologists and archaeologists, and 2 more pavement-like features have been found nearby. Some explorers even claim that they found more man-made structures beneath the Bimini Road, and artifacts from an unknown ancient civilization on an adjacent island. Well, as you can imagine, most mainstream archaeologists aren't convinced that the Bimini Road is actually man-made. The current thought is that it's some natural formation that just looks like it was man-made. Either way, this discovery does give one pause. Could the tale of Atlantis be true? The first reference that society has to a place called Atlantis came from Plato. He wrote an allegory on how some nations are just too prideful. It was done in the form of a dialogue between 2 men, Timaeus and Critias. In the dialogue, Critias speaks of this great civilization that existed 9,000 years before his time, or roughly right around 12,000 years ago.
Then above all, they appeared to be superlatively fair and blessed. They made of it an abode amazing to behold for the magnitude and beauty of its workmanship. Walls of brass, tin, and copper sparkled like fire. The wealth they possessed was so immense that the like had never been seen before in any royal house, nor will ever easily be seen again.
From the standpoint of the ancient Greeks, the Athenians seemed like they were a godlike race. I wonder if Critias were somehow able to see into the future and see the modern world, would he describe it much differently than he had Atlantis? To the Greeks, our technological advancements would no doubt make us seem godlike as well. Of course, nearly every historian and most scholarly experts today will tell you that Atlantis is nothing more than a Greek fairy tale that was made up by Plato. But hundreds of years before Plato, a work by Homer called the Iliad spoke of an interesting place called Troy, and nearly every historian and scholarly expert said that Troy too was just a fairy tale. But then one day, a couple of men, Calvert and Schliemann, actually found the very real city of Troy. Is it possible that the experts could be wrong about Atlantis as well? Plato puts the destruction of Atlantis roughly right around 12,000 years ago. And believe it or not, recent archaeological evidence suggests that a devastating global event took place right around 12,000 years ago. The Younger Dryas is believed to have been a global event that took place between 12,900 and 11,700 years ago. The northern hemisphere suddenly became cooler, while the southern hemisphere became warmer. At many dig sites around the world, archaeologists discovered that around the same time, the Earth was mysteriously covered in a strange black soot. This soot is commonly referred to as the black mat.
This black mat layer that you see through here represents the extinction layer. Below that, there are mammoth bones, there are American horse bones, American camel, the dire wolves, and saber-toothed cats. And so far, not a single one of those has been found in place above that layer. We think that probably 50 to 60% of the people across the northern hemisphere died at this time.
Perhaps even more interesting was what was discovered in the soot.
What we found was melted glass spherules. So this is our first clue that some high-temperature event had happened, but we didn't know what it was. It was hot enough to melt a car into a molten puddle of metal in the parking lot.
Geology professor James Kennett hypothesizes that this event could have been caused by a fragmented meteor hitting the Earth. When Dr. Kennett first began to look into this, he had no idea that he'd find evidence suggesting that this event was global.
It's much more extreme than I ever thought when I started this work. The more work that has been done, the more extreme it seems. This is further evidence that the Younger Dryas climate onset is an extreme, global event, with major consequences on the animal life and human life at the time.
Kennett believes that it could have been a meteor impact that caused this destruction, but there are those out there that suggest it wasn't a meteor impact, but rather an ancient global nuclear war. In one of the great Sanskrit epics of the Hindus, the Mahabharata, a war is described between the 5 Pandava brothers and their 100 stepbrothers. The following is a translation of just a small excerpt of this epic. As we share this, please keep in mind, this is not describing something from today. This is an ancient text.
A single projectile charged with all of the power of the universe, an incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as 1,000 suns rose in all of its splendor. A perpendicular explosion with billowing smoke clouds. The cloud of smoke rising after its first explosion formed into expanding round circles, like the opening of giant parasols. It was an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death. It reduced to ashes the entire race of the Vrishnas and the Akanyas. The corpses were so burnt as to be unrecognizable. The hair and nails fell out, pottery broke without apparent cause, and the birds turned white. After a few hours, all food was infected. In order to escape from the fire, the soldiers threw themselves into the streams.
To me, that sounds eerily similar to how someone might describe a modern-day nuclear blast. According to Gillian Granum, a lady with a PhD in education and a master's in journalism, Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the nuclear bomb, said this about the possibility of an ancient nuclear war.
Ancient cities whose brick and stone walls have literally been vitrified, that is, fused together, can be found in India, Ireland, Scotland, France, Turkey, and other places. There is no logical explanation for the vitrification of stone forts and cities, except from an atomic blast.
According to ancienthebrew.org, scientists in Rajasthan, India, are currently investigating a site where there had been a higher than normal rate of birth defects and cancer. The level of radiation at this site was so high that the Indian government quarantined off the area and shut it down. Then excavators were brought in. These excavators started digging, looking for the cause of this radiation. They eventually unearthed an ancient city where, now check this out, they found evidence of an atomic blast dating back as far as 12,000 years ago. Then there's the work of a couple of scientists who stumbled across atmospheric changes in Earth's distant past. And this pointed to evidence that a technologically advanced civilization was here long before humans ever existed. On September 19, 1991, scientists discovered an abrupt spike in carbon and oxygen isotopes from 56 million years ago. When they took a closer look, they found that there were other atmospheric changes as well. These changes included a rise in temperature, the spiking of certain metals like zinc and chromium, and a high increase in CO2 and CH4. Interestingly, these types of atmospheric changes are exactly the same type of atmospheric changes that we, here in the present, have been experiencing since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. This discovery was so striking that a couple of guys who were looking for atmospheric signs of life on other planets, Adam Frank and Gavin Schmidt, wrote a paper on the possibility of an intelligent civilization existing here on Earth during this time 56 million years ago. It's called the Silurian Hypothesis.
Specifically, compared with the current industrial age, almost all changes found so far for the time period in question, 56 million years ago, are of the same sign and comparable magnitude.
In other words, the atmospheric changes that are happening now in the industrial age are the exact same type of atmospheric changes that occurred 56 million years ago.
Furthermore, there's evidence at many of these events that warning was driven by a massive input of exogenous, biogenic carbon, either as CO2 or CH4.
Exogenous is defined as originating from outside of an organism or the environment. It has an unnatural connotation to it. Basically, there's more CO2 and CH4 in the atmosphere now than there was just before the current industrial age, and we find the same atmospheric composition occurring 56 million years ago. It's as if some intelligent species existed way back then and then entered their own industrial age. The title, The Silurian Hypothesis, was taken from an episode of Doctor Who called Doctor Who and the Silurians. It was about an intelligent reptilian race who existed millions of years before humans did. This atmospheric phenomenon lasted for a whopping 200,000 years, but it did come to an end. And today, outside of this atmospheric change, there isn't even a hint that an intelligent reptilian race ever existed. Or is there? In 2013, a poll was taken and it showed that, now, are you ready for this? A whopping 12 million people believe that Earth is currently under the control of a superior reptilian race that evolved on Earth long before humans did. These reptiles are at the very pinnacle of every influential institution on the planet. They're at the top of politics, the entertainment industry, the educational system, and every other major organization that influences the world. These beings normally live underground, but they can phase shift to look just like humans, and some of them live among us. According to those in the know, like David Icke, these reptilians have been running things since way before humans were ever here. Icke says that the core of their secret society is called the Brotherhood of Babylon. And for those of you who know about and believe in the existence of the Illuminati, they control it.
Humanity is actually under the control of dinosaur-like alien reptiles called the Babylon Brotherhood, who must consume human blood to maintain their human appearance.
Pretty intense stuff, isn't it? So how much of this report is true? Well, there's a lot here that's questionable, and I'm not trying to be a naysayer, but I do think that you should know all of the facts. Bemini Road? Well, as I said, experts believe that that's just a natural formation. And Edgar Cayce? Well, most people believe that a lot of his predictions never came true, so why believe him? And what about the Younger Dryas, the sudden destruction 12,000 years ago? Well, scientists are actually split right down the middle on that one. Dr. Kennett's ideas of an asteroid hitting the Earth are fringe, and one would be hard-pressed to find a solid, respectable scientist who believes that it was caused by an ancient nuclear war. And Alan West? Well, he's suspect. Amy looked into him, and she's pretty good at that stuff. She found over 100 references where he's referred to as Doctor, but she wasn't able to verify where he got his doctorate from, or even if he actually has one. And although he's appeared on several television documentaries, she found that in 2002, he was fined and he was put on probation in the state of California for illegally posing as a state-licensed geologist. The quote from Dr. Oppenheimer about there being a possible ancient nuclear war, well, we only found that on a couple of sites. One of those sites is listed as belonging to Dr. Gillian Granum. Well, Amy reached out to Dr. Granum, but she never responded. And the information on ancienthebrew.org, well, we're still looking into that one. Now, all of that being said, Earth is ancient. In the Dark Ages, right after the fall of Rome, well, that shows that entire civilizations can indeed forget and go backwards. Isn't it just a little time-centric to think that we, here in the current era, are the only ones who have ever risen to such technological heights in the history of humanity? You know, so many theories start out as just being completely dismissed, only to be accepted later. Okay, so before we start, let me tell everybody that we are soon coming to an end. This may be our very last show. And I want to thank everybody for being subscribers. We love you, and it's been fun. And we'll be back. So we're coming to the end of season 3. So we may be gone for 2 weeks after this video. We'll put a post up. We might do 1 or 2 more, depending on where we're at.
All right.
So you've been warned. So what do you have for us today?
Well, I was thinking about different theories in the past that were proposed and immediately, basically called heresy.
All right.
Thinking about Copernicus and his insane theory that planets revolve around the sun, not
instead of the Earth. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, how controversial. Like in 1543, I think he proposed that.
Yeah.
It wasn't until almost a century later that it was accepted. And I believe, Galileo tried to further that theory, and the Catholic Church absolutely railroaded him.
Yeah.
And it was a nightmare. So, yes. And then another one I was thinking of came about in, I believe, 1893. I think his last name was Gilbert, but he said that the craters on the moon are from impacts. Things like meteorites.
Yeah.
And that was initially, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
There's no way. And 70-ish years later.
70 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
It's like, okay, yes, they are.
Right.
Yeah. So the third one I was thinking about is more recent, right? 1912, I believe, the theory of continental drift, right? About the continents spreading apart. And again, initially rejected. People thought that's absolutely asinine.
Yeah.
And in the 1960s, it was accepted as a consensus that, that theory is valid.
So that puts a little bit of pause on the people that say, no, humans are the absolute first species on Earth to have risen to such a technological height.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Like I said in the report, I feel like it's just a little bit time-centric, right? Egocentric, time-centric.
Mm-hmm.
We live in this time.
Mm-hmm.
We're the ones here.
Mm-hmm.
So technology has never been higher than what we've made it out to be. There's no possible way that a civilization could have risen up and then crumbled and then disappeared over millions of years.
Right.
What would we find? Yeah. We may not find a single piece of evidence for quite a while. Right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's possible.
It is possible.
Yeah.
And, when our initial reactions are, this is absolutely ridiculous. There's no way.
Yeah. Why do we do that? That's crazy.
I was thinking about that, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, right? And the black mat and all of that. Well, I recently came across a very lengthy scientific article written by Dr. James Powell. And he actually asked that question, like, why do we initially reject scientific theories? And we'll put a link to his paper in the description because it's fascinating. He looks at all of those scientists that came out and said, this Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, they even said it is Frankenstein's monster.
Wow.
And they refuted it and said, here's why it's wrong. Here's all our evidence on why it's wrong. Well, this Dr. James Powell went one by one and said, look at their rebuttal.
Yeah.
It doesn't hold water.
Yeah.
And he went through, and it's very interesting because he, piece by piece, pretty much debunked the debunkers.
I have a theory about that.
Yeah.
I think that when something brand new comes along that's, not been previously accepted as the truth, people have a knee-jerk reaction. Like that's totally outlandish. Mm-hmm. How could that possibly be? And then they want to stick to that. They want to stick to what's already in the science books.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a good thing, right? Because maybe it really forces new ideas to really prove themselves.
Yeah.
Right? Because if scientists just accepted everything that came along, right, then we'd live in a chaotic world.
Yes.
So it's very difficult to put new ideas forth. But that doesn't mean that new ideas can't be true.
I like that.
Right?
Yeah, that's perfect.
So instead of asking you today what you think, I'm going to give my thoughts because I love these types of reports.
Great.
I don't know if there was a civilization before the current one. But I'm not prepared to be so pompous as to say that I just happen to be living in the most technologically advanced civilization that's ever been on the planet. I'm not willing to go that far. In the report, we talked about David Icke, and we talked about how 12 million people went in a poll and said they believe that the world is being ran by reptiles that were here before humans.
Right.
That makes me think of that John Carpenter film, I think it was from the 80s, They Live. Do you remember that? Did I ever show you that?
No.
I got to show you that film.
Yeah, I'd love to see it.
So guys, leave a comment if you think that I should show Amy the They Live film, if you know what I'm talking about. All right. Well, I guess that's it. Thank you. Huh?
Jinx.
Ancient global civilizations. Reports like these really intrigue me. It's the what ifs that I get all wrapped up into. Like, what if time travel is possible? Or what would other dimensions look like? And that makes me think of the John Titor case. Back in 1998, the radio host Art Bell received a fax from a man claiming that he was from the future. Well, a few years later, this mysterious individual popped up on a couple different message boards. He talked about an alternate timeline where the United States engaged in a second civil war, and the world broke out into World War III. Many people believe that this case has been debunked, but there were tons of detailed posts from this man on these message boards. He answered all types of questions, so many in fact that one could actually assemble them in chronological order, giving a complete history of this man's life from his point of view. Well, Amy, she sat down and she took the time to do just that. And we did a complete report on this man's life. And as of the date of this video, I believe that we are the only ones to have done this. It's fascinating because we share where this man was born, what his childhood was like, and how he got involved in time travel. If you'd like to see it, it's here.
Shout out to all of you that have been with us on our journey into reporting on the paranormal. We truly appreciate you. And if you see your name anywhere here, we just share people that support us. And so thank you to them as well.
Isn't she beautiful?